Okay, ji. Conditional probability. Now, in easier word, what is conditional probability? Probability probability within a probability. So as I said, the conditional probability is probability within a probability. We'll be further discussing this, but it is always used when two different events are being compared. So that means whenever we talk about two different events, so there might be a possibility that conditional probability is tested. In normal conditional probability, I would suggest tree diagram to be created for two events. So one thing is very clear. So we know that conditional probability is probability within a probability. It is always used when two different events are being compared. Tree diagram to be created for two events. Now, let's just work out with the example, or we can even write down the formula. Let's say the formula is probability probability is equal to probability of an event under given condition. Probability of the event under given condition upon probability of given condition. That means when we are talking about probability within a probability, there would be event that you need to find out. But that event probability will be probability from the given condition event. That means total event of the given condition. In easier words, we'll just work out with examples so that it's easier for us to understand. So if I say that Ayan went for a jungle, right? Went for a jungle adventure. The probability that he travels, the probability that he travels on a horse an elephant and camel is 0.6, 0.3 and 0.1. 0.6, 0.3 and 0.1. Now the probability is already given for Ayan being traveling. The total probability of any event should always be equal to 1. So 0.6, 0.3 and 0.1 already gives me the answer as what? 1. Now, if I add certain things, the probability that he the probability that he is afraid on a horse is equal to 0.85. The probability that he is afraid on an elephant is 0.45. The probability that he is afraid on camel is 0.35. Now, considering the given example question, we can understand that there are two distinct events. There are two distinct events. There are two distinct events. Number one is the mode of transport. Number two is his feelings during transport. His feeling during transport. Now, to understand this, we can also work upon that probability that he travels on horse is 0.6. Probability that he travels on elephant was 0.3. Probability that he travels on camel is 0.1. But considering that when he travels on horse, he was afraid, the probability of afraid was 0.85. So if the probability of afraid is 0.85, then the probability of not afraid should be 0.35. If the probability of being afraid is 0.45 when he travels on elephant, then probability of not being afraid would be 0.55. If the probability of being afraid when traveled with camel is 0.35, then probability of being not afraid when traveling by camel will be 0.65. So we can also draw the tree diagram representing this information. The tree diagram will be in such a way that there are three major events. There are three major events of transport. Let's say that the probability of horse, probability of elephant, and probability of camel. The probability of horse was 0.6, 0.3, and 0.1. This is giving me horse, elephant, and camel. But with the horse, he was afraid, and there was also the probability of not afraid. With elephant, he was afraid, and the probability is also not afraid. There is a chance of being afraid and the chance of being not afraid. For each, the probability are given that 0.85. So this is 0.15. If this is 0.45, then this should be 0.55. If this is 0.35, then automatically this should be 0.65. So with each of the tree diagram represent, what we know is that from each part, considering the probability of horse and is afraid is what? 0.6 multiplied by 0.85. This should be 0.6 multiplied by 0.85. That means sitting on horse and being afraid is 0.6 and 0.85, which will be 0.51. The probability of sitting on horse and being not afraid will be 0.6 multiplied by 0.15, which will be 0.09. Probability of sitting on elephant and being afraid will be 0.3 multiplied by 0.45, which will be 0.135. Probability of sitting on elephant and being not afraid will be 0.3 multiplied by 0.55, which will be 0.165. Noting that sitting on elephant, sitting on camel and being afraid will be 0.1 multiplied by 0.35, will be 0.035. Sitting on elephant and not being afraid will be 0.1 into 0.65, which will be 0.065. Now, with each of the probability that is there in our hand, that means we made sure that we calculated the probability of the horse being afraid. We made sure that we calculate the probability of horse being not afraid. We made sure that we calculate the probability of elephant afraid. We made sure that we calculate the probability of elephant not being afraid. We made sure that we calculate the probability of camel being afraid, and we made sure that we calculate the probability of camel being not afraid. Now, considering this, what we need to understand is that we have two different events. The two different events here is the mode of the transport and the feeling. This particular part shows me the mode of the transport, and this particular part gives me the mode of the feeling that the ion has. Now, considering this, if the question clearly tells me, find the probability that ion is afraid. Let's say probability of being afraid. Now, when we talk about probability of being afraid, the question does not say anything related to any particular event here. The question here is open-ended question. That means the ion can be on horse afraid, the ion can be on camel afraid, the ion can be on elephant afraid, because the question really wants us to find the probability of being afraid. When the question really wants us to find the probability of being afraid, that means the probability will be that it is on horse and afraid, or it can be elephant and afraid, or it can be on camel and afraid, because the question was particularly unclear of what to do. But one thing was clear, that the probability was needed of being afraid. Now, being afraid can be on what? Being afraid can be when we are sitting on horse, when it is sitting on horse and being afraid. So this is the probability. Sitting on elephant and being afraid, this is your probability. Sitting on camel and being afraid, this is your probability. So this will give me the only afraid probability. Only afraid probability, only afraid probability. When we have horse and afraid, this is confirmed. That is the reason we multiplied. When it was elephant and afraid, it was confirmed. That is the reason we multiplied. When we have camel and afraid, it was confirmed. That was the reason we multiplied. But if the question says that we need to take out the probability of afraid, we are not sure which one to take out, right? So that means we'll be taking out all the afraid probability. Each of the afraid probability will be added together. So that means particularly when we'll add them, this was 0.51 plus 0.135 plus 0.035. This will give me probability of being afraid. And the total probability of being afraid is 0.68. Now, the question can similar be probability probability of being not afraid. So if the question says probability of not afraid, now not afraid is an open-ended question. That means it can be what? The Ayan can ride on horse and still be not afraid, elephant still be not afraid, or camel and still be not afraid. That means we are talking of three different events: horse not afraid, elephant not afraid, and camel not afraid. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have horse not afraid, then we have elephant not afraid, then we have camel and not afraid. So for each of this, we have 0.09 plus 0.165 plus 0.065. So these will be the 3 points where we will add them up and we'll make sure that we find out the probability of not being afraid. So the probability is 0.32. So there can be two different questions that can be asked: probability of being afraid and probability of being not afraid. We have still not worked anything regarding to the conditional probability up till now. It is just the normal probability that we are dealing in. Yes, we made sure that we draw the tree diagram. But nothing is related to the conditional probability here. The major thing that we found out the probability of being afraid and the probability of being not afraid.